大家好，歡迎大家收睇周一長談呢個節目。我哋嘅節目主持人姚永安。大家一路關心香港嘅新聞嘅時候咧，近期亦都可能睇到一單新聞，就係英國有一個團體咧，就係收到香港政府嘅警告，就係話如果佢哋繼續運作嘅話咧，就會有好嚴重嘅後果嘅。呢個團體係咩名咧？就係叫 Hong Kong Watch。究竟發生咩事，同埋佢哋做咗啲乜嘢，令到香港政府係要針對呢個團體要發出咁嚴厲嘅警告呢？今日好高興咧，請嚟 Hong Kong Watch 嘅創辦人 Benedict 同我哋傾偈嘅。Ben，thanks for attending our show.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
OK， 首先我知道你曾前係住過喺香港嘅，咁我想問下你，其實你嘅背景係乜嘢，同埋點解你咁中意同埋關心香港嘅咧？
Yes, absolutely. I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years. For the first 5 years after the handover from 1997 to 2002, it was my first job after graduating from university, and I worked in Hong Kong as a journalist. So Hong Kong is very special to me because it's the place where I began my career, both as a journalist and actually also as an activist, because when I lived in Hong Kong, I, in my spare time, worked a lot on human rights issues elsewhere in the region, places like Myanmar and, of course, mainland China, North Korea, and other parts of Asia. And at that time, Hong Kong was one of the most open, freest cities in the region, and it was a place where we could use the freedoms we had in Hong Kong to speak out for others who didn't have freedom. I never imagined that the day would come where I would be having to devote my time to speaking out for Hong Kong itself. The reason I'm so passionate about it is firstly because it was once my home and I feel a personal commitment to it. And I loved my time in Hong Kong. I had a very happy time there. But also because as a British person, I think my country in particular, but also the whole democratic world, has a responsibility to Hong Kong. Hong Kong was handed over to China on the promise of one country, two systems, and its freedoms being protected. And China has totally broken that promise. And lastly, I would say that Hong Kong is really in the front line in the struggle between freedom and autocracy. And now, of course, it's lost its freedoms. But if we don't stand up for Hong Kong, our own freedoms will be increasingly threatened. So those are the reasons I care about Hong Kong and speak out so much.
咁你就介紹咗你自己啦。咁其實就你哋個組織咧叫做香港監察 Hong Kong Watch 啦。咁究竟係你咩時候去成立呢個組織，同埋點解會成立呢個組織，同埋呢個組織嘅目標同埋運作係乜嘢嚟嘅咧
？When the umbrella movement happened in 2014, I started just as an individual in my spare time to speak out for Hong Kong because I could see things were changing significantly in Hong Kong. From 2014 to 2017, I was doing that just on my own as an individual in my spare time, talking to members of parliament and writing articles and arranging meetings for Hong Kong activists. But by 2017, I realized two things. Firstly, that it was no longer sustainable for one person, myself, to be doing this in my spare time. We needed an organization to advocate for Hong Kong. At that time, of course, it's changed since, but at that time, it seemed like almost nobody else was really speaking out. The level of awareness among British members of parliament was extremely low. The press coverage was extremely low. So I thought we need an organization to do this properly. And that's why we started Hong Kong Watch. Actually, the idea kind of crystallized for me when I was traveling. I was in Indonesia for work. I was working for another human rights organization at the time. And this was just a few days before Joshua Wong, Nathan Law, and Alex Chow were jailed for the first time. And I thought to myself, somebody should speak out for them. And I ended up organizing a statement, which I got parliamentarians and others from around the world to sign on to. But I remember sitting in a taxi in the city of Surabaya in Indonesia in a traffic jam. And anyone who knows Indonesian traffic jams knows that they give you a lot of thinking time because they're very long. And I was thinking a lot about Hong Kong, and that's when the idea crystallized, and I messaged a few other friends who I'd been informally talking with, and we said, let's do it. In terms of our goals, we are a research and advocacy organization existing to monitor the human rights situation in Hong Kong and advocate to policymakers, parliamentarians, and others, and governments around the world. I would say our goal has also slightly shifted in the last couple of years. When we started, our goal was to protect and defend and strengthen one country, two systems, which was coming under ever-increasing pressure. Now, I would say, very sadly, one country, two systems has gone effectively. And our goal now is to firstly, keep the spotlight on Hong Kong, mitigate the damage, make sure that political prisoners and others are not forgotten, advocate for a lifeline for Hong Kongers who need to get out, and also keep up the pressure on the Chinese regime and make sure that they're not allowed to get away with what they've done to Hong Kong without any consequences.
嗱咁，如果照你咁講法咧，我諗你就可能係其中一啲關於即係香港同埋中國政府就係話一啲外國勢力咧就係干預香港嘅。咁啊，其實即係究竟你哋香港 Watch 嘅運作係點樣嘅咧？你係咪有辦公室、有職員，同埋你啲經費點樣嚟嘅咧？
Yes, so we have never had any presence in Hong Kong itself. When we started, just before we started, I made a visit to Hong Kong, but unfortunately, I was denied entry, but on the orders of Beijing in October 2017. Some of my colleagues did travel to Hong Kong after that until the national security law was imposed on Hong Kong, and then we realized that none of us should travel to Hong Kong any longer. So we've never had an office or staff in Hong Kong. Our way of working is we've grown enormously. When we first started, we had just one part-time staff, and I was the chair of the board. Now we have a team of 8 staff. I'm the chief executive. We don't have a physical office. In early 2020, as we knew that our team was expanding, we thought about getting an office and getting the funding to find an office. And then COVID came, and everyone was working from home anyway. So I'm very glad we didn't get an office. So we all work from home. We meet up now that restrictions have lifted. We meet up in person quite often. And we operate in not only London, but increasingly in Canada. And we're in the process of preparing to launch Hong Kong Watch in Canada. We have one colleague in Washington, DC. And we do a lot of work also at the European Union, the United Nations, Australia, and other capitals around the world. And regarding funding, our funding comes from a few foundations and a number of individual donors. We've had in the past some very successful crowdfunding campaigns, and we have other regular donors who are very generous in their support of us.
講起即係你哋所做嘅嘢啦，有一樣嘢我真係需要代表香港人咧係對你作出一個感謝嘅，因為因為你哋嘅工作咧就係間接或者直接咧令到英國政府咧就給予香港嘅居民咧即係擁有 BNO 身份嘅人咧就係可以喺英國居住嘅。咁啊咩叫 BNO 咯 ？BNO 叫做British National Overseas 係香港97年之前嘅永久居民身份嘅人咧，都係有呢個資格嘅，無論申請唔申請都好。咁雖然呢個就話即係英國嘅海外國民啦，咁但係呢個海外國民咧一直以嚟咧都係冇呢個居英權嘅。但係直至到舊年咧，就突然之間咧，就英國政府就給予香港擁有呢個 BNO 身份嘅人咧，就係去英國去長期嘅居留，同埋有呢個居英權嘅。咁而呢方面咧，就相信即係你哋做咗好多工作嘅。咁我亦都想問下你哋，究竟其實英國點解突然之間係會咁樣俾咁大批嘅香港人搬去英國住咧？咁同埋你哋喺呢方面做咗啲乜嘢咧？
Yes, so we started advocating for more rights for BNOs from the moment that we founded Hong Kong Watch. So from really early 2018, we realized this was an issue that we should be speaking out on and urging the government here to do more on. And we kept that up from early 2018 right the way through to 2020, when I think it was the day after the national security law was imposed on Hong Kong, the British government announced that it would do this. And to be honest, I wasn't confident that they would do it. I didn't expect them to be as courageous and generous as I think they were. And I really applaud them for what they have done. I think the reasons they did it were a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, there was a steady build-up of pressure on the government over the couple of years before 2020, including from their own MPs. So MPs from all parties, but quite a number of Conservative MPs who were supporting this. And what was quite interesting was that the MPs who spoke out on it were across the spectrum, as I say, in all political parties. But within the Conservative Party, there were people who are not usually known for being sympathetic on issues of immigration, people who are normally a bit more small c conservative on immigration, but who really recognized Britain's responsibility to Hong Kong, and so we're pushing the government to do this. That's one factor. I think the second factor, of course, the biggest factor, is that the government knew that it had to do something in response to the imposition of the national security law and the dismantling of one country, two systems. And I think it felt that this, although it's a generous and courageous policy, it was perhaps the least risky policy for them in terms of offending Beijing. I mean, it did offend Beijing, but I think they preferred to do this rather than, for example, impose sanctions, which would have drawn much greater anger from Beijing. And then lastly, I think everybody recognized that as well as our moral responsibility to Hong Kong, actually also Hong Kongers as a generalization are amazingly entrepreneurial, dynamic, talented people who would make a real contribution to the UK. So there was a recognition that this wasn't going to be in the long term a burden for the UK, but on the contrary, it would actually be a wonderful benefit for our society. So I think those are the reasons the British government did this.
OK， 嗱咁我知道咧，即係有香港人係要去用呢個居英權身份係去英國咧，就同我哋即係移民嚟加拿大或移民喺英國唔同嘅。咁其實可唔可以同我哋講下，究竟即係香港人係點樣可以即係走去英國住咧？咁同埋仲有就係話，即係佢哋去英國之後係咪即刻可以即係有呢個工作證可以工作啊？同埋佢哋嘅子女係咪就可以入讀當地嘅學校？同埋佢哋譬如讀書嘅話，係俾海外留學生嘅錢啦，抑或係俾當地學生嘅學費咧
So yes, when Hong Kongers who are BNOs come to the UK, they can work straight away. They are on a pathway to citizenship, so they don't become full citizens immediately, but after I think it's about 5 years, they can take up citizenship, but they can work from day one. They can put their kids in up to high school for free in the state schools. There is a health surcharge as part of the BNO application, so healthcare is not free for them until they become citizens and taxpayers. But initially, they do have to put up some funding for themselves for health. And in terms of university education, they are currently charged international student fees. We've actually been advocating for the government to change that and to give them local fees, and we'll see if we make progress on that. But currently, they're charged international fees until they become citizens. The government did also, after announcing the initial package, some months later, they did announce that although BNOs in general will not have recourse to public funds, of course, those who are who find themselves, and we hope this doesn't happen, but those who find themselves in difficulty if they can't find work, and no one wants them to be destitute, so they can, in extreme situations, access benefits if they need to.
嗱，咁啊，以你所知咧，究竟呢個政策實施之後咧，大概有幾多香港人係真係搬咗去英國嘅咧？咁我哋譬如睇到好多媒體人所熟悉嘅媒體人，香港媒體人好多其實我睇到咧都結果係去咗英國嘅。咁同埋咧就佢哋喺英國係咪都係集中喺倫敦居住，抑或成個英國都會有香港人？咁同埋仲有就係話佢哋喺當地嘅適應能唔能夠做得到咧？
Yes, so I believe the latest figures are that approximately 100,000 Hong Kongers have come to the UK since the scheme opened up. And they are, I would say, spread across the UK. Quite a lot have come to London, but also quite a lot have gone to other cities where the cost of living is lower than London. House prices are lower. So places like Manchester, Birmingham. I know there are some in a small city called St Albans outside London, Reading, and a few other places. And within London, it's interesting that there's a high concentration of Hong Kongers in the districts of Kingston and Sutton. And the reason for that is apparently Kingston and Sutton have some of the best schools in London. And so Hong Kongers have been attracted to those areas. And I think in terms of how they are settling and integrating, overall, I think very, very well. I meet with a lot of Hong Kongers in the UK now. In fact, I sometimes joke that I'm unable to go to Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is coming to me. And they seem to be settling in really well. There obviously are challenges finding jobs and so on, but many of them have found jobs. Some of them are starting businesses, and I think they all tell me that they feel very welcomed, that their local communities have welcomed them. And there's also been a very good effort by UK civil society and government to introduce a very good kind of welcome and integration program and support and facilities. So I think overall it's very positive.
嗱，咁節目開頭我都講過啦，你哋啱啱冇幾耐咧，就係收到香港政府嘅警告信，咁即係直情係話你哋一啲好嚴重嘅指控嘅，咁其實可唔可以同你講下係一點樣一回事咧
？Yes, so just about a week ago, I woke up one morning in London and opened my emails, and first of all, there was a letter from the Hong Kong police, and then that was followed a few hours later by an email from the Hong Kong National Security Bureau. But both letters basically said more or less the same thing, which was they said that our website, and obviously by implication the organization as a whole, but specifically the website, they said posed a serious national security threat to China, that it was in breach of the national security law in Hong Kong, and that we were instructed to take down the entire website within 72 hours of receipt of the letters. And it said that if we fail to comply, then I personally, as the co-founder and chief executive, could be liable for a fine of 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. That's about 13,000 US dollars, 10,000 British pounds. I'm not sure what the conversion to Canadian dollars is, but the listeners can work that out. But in addition, it said that I could face, one letter said between 1 year and life imprisonment. The other letter said between 3 years and life imprisonment. And it cited, of course, Article 38 of the National Security Law, which applies extraterritorially. So it means that anyone anywhere in the world can be in breach of the national security law, whether or not they're a Hong Kong resident. And I remember when the national security law was first introduced, we noted that article with a lot of concern. But I don't think I ever expected that the Hong Kong authorities would actually use it. And I certainly didn't expect Hong Kong Watch and myself to be the first for it to be applied to.
嗱，正如我喺開頭節目度講過啦，就係話你哋最近收到香港政府嘅警告信啦，就話你哋係犯咗國安法嘅。咁而我喺新聞度亦都睇到咧，佢哋用嘅即係用詞咧都好嚴厲嘅，就話佢哋經過呢個刑事嘅調查咧，就發現呢個香港監察啦，即係你哋啦。咁就係犯咗呢個國安法，咁你哋所做嘅嘢咧係危害香港特區政府同埋中國政府，咁同埋亦都係干預香港嘅事務，你哋都係呢個同外國勢力勾結咧，就係即係做呢啲事情嘅。咁其實即係我又覺得好有趣啦，因為即係你本身係一個英國人，而 Hong Kong Watch 咧亦都係一個英國註冊嘅非牟利組織。咁你哋作為英國人、英國組織去同英國政府、英國嘅議員係講一啲即係關於香港嘅事務，你哋嘅意見嘅話，咁但係雖然呢個係你哋作為英國人嘅一個基本嘅權利，咁但係咧而家就犯咗香港嘅國安法啦。咁其實就警告已經出咗啦，你哋會唔會即係乖乖地聽話咧？
Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult to understand and to explain because it's such a bizarre, crazy idea. But basically, as I mentioned earlier, the national security law does have this extraterritorial clause, and so that's what they're basing this on. They're saying that anyone anywhere in the world can be in violation of national security law. As you say, our argument would be we are exercising our democratic rights, and also we are a foreign entity ourselves. So I'm not quite sure whether we're colluding with ourselves or colluding with our government by talking to them perfectly legitimately. There are elected representatives, and we talk with other governments as well. And I should say, just as a slight tangent, we have really appreciated the support that Canada in particular has given us. The day after the story broke, the Canadian High Commission in London contacted me, asked if I would come in to brief them, and they actually invited diplomats from Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, the United States and Japan to join the meeting. So, and then they tweeted, they took a picture of myself and my colleague Sam in the High Commission and tweeted it to express their support and solidarity with us. So we really appreciate the position Canada has taken in support of us. In terms of our next steps, no, I mean, we're certainly not going to comply, and that was never in doubt. We, of course, as soon as I received the letters, I informed both my team and also our trustees, and we had several meetings on the day that it happened. But the meetings were to discuss how we respond, but never for discussion was the idea that we would comply. And then, of course, we informed our patrons, and then we went public with it. And I think our next steps are to continue to make people aware of this, because one of our concerns is that although we're the first foreign organization and individual to be targeted, I don't think we're going to be the last. I think they will probably use this against others. And so it's really important that the international community take a very strong stand urgently. We were really pleased that the British Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, made a statement as soon as the news came out, and that was very strong. The other thing that we also need to do is to step up the focus on those countries that still have extradition agreements with either Hong Kong or mainland China, because although there's almost nothing that the Hong Kong or Chinese authorities can do to enforce this against me in the UK, there is a concern that obviously when I travel, if I travel to countries that have extradition agreements, potentially in the worst case scenario, that they could be triggered. And not just me. I mean, this applies far more importantly to many Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Chinese dissidents. So we would really encourage countries, especially democratic countries, to suspend or cancel their extradition agreements.
Yeah， 咁啊，其實亦都即係點解即係加拿大政府同埋其他西方國家馬上都重視即係香港監察係被警告呢件事咧？因為其實即係做同樣嘅事情咧，唔單止係你喺英國啦，譬如話加拿大亦都有一啲組織，亦都係做類似嘅事情，關注香港嘅事務嘅，甚至乎一啲個人或者甚至議員咧，亦都係對香港嘅事情咧作出好多即係關注，同埋亦都有出到好多聲嘅。咁其實呢啲人會唔會下一步就收到警告，或者甚至乎將來被香港或者中國政府通緝咧？呢個其實都係即係需要關注嘅事情嚟嘅。咁其實好明顯啦，就睇得到就係話你哋所做嘅工作咧，香港政府同埋中國咧，似乎都感覺到呢個受到壓力或者受到威嚇啦。咁其實你可唔可以同我哋講下，你哋除咗話即係幫香港人攞到呢個居英權之外咧，仲有冇其他嘅工作其實可以同我哋介紹下嘅咧？
Yes, certainly. So in terms of our policy advocacy, we've been very active in advocating with Canada, with Australia, with the United States and the European Union to also introduce what we call lifeboat schemes, because the UK has been very generous. It's taking a large number of Hong Kongers, but it's important that other countries also help and share responsibility. And I applaud what Canada has already done. We hope they can be encouraged to do more, and the same with Australia, the US and the EU. But in addition to lifeboat policies, as you mentioned earlier, we have been calling for sanctions, which of course is a red line under the national security law. But we believe that it's really important that the regime in Beijing and their representatives in Hong Kong are not allowed to get away with what they've done to Hong Kong with impunity, with no consequences. If they are not made to face some consequences, they will just be emboldened to increase and intensify further the repression in Hong Kong, but also their aggression abroad. And it will embolden them even more in regard to Taiwan and the South China Sea and beyond. So for those reasons, we've been calling on governments around the world to impose sanctions. Ideally, we would like governments to do it together in a coordinated way, because I think China is quite skilled at retaliating against individual countries and also playing divide and rule and playing countries off each other. But if democratic countries and allies stand together and impose sanctions together, that would be very effective. In terms of other things we're doing, in addition to our advocacy and our reactive work responding to developments on the ground, we also have a lot of proactive initiatives in terms of our research. We're currently working on a report on the erosion of press freedom in Hong Kong. We've published reports on ethical investment in Hong Kong and China, and we have other reports coming out in due course. And we're increasingly engaged also in community outreach. In now that there are so many Hong Kongers coming both to the UK and Canada in particular, we're engaged in working with them and especially helping them to understand our political system, so civic and political education, so that they can engage their members of parliament and the political system in their new home, both for Hong Kong purposes and for any local needs that they have. So that's a growing area of our work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you just mentioned that you are going to expand your operation to Canada. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the plan is underway. We don't have a precise date yet, but we're certainly at some point this year we will formally launch Hong Kong Watch Canada. We already have one employee who's just recently been hired to help us develop and help prepare for the launch, based in Toronto. He's actually a Hong Konger himself. We have, since we were founded, we've had a number of patrons in Canada, totally bipartisan, members of parliament and politicians from all parties. And one of our trustees is also based in Canada. So we've been developing over the last few years, and we will formally announce the launch of Hong Kong Watch later this year.
其實香港國安法係成立嘅時候咧，就好多人都好關心，或者話呢個國安法係咪真係淨係喺香港先至會適用嘅咧？咁當時亦都有啲人提出嚟就係話唔係㗎，即係你根據佢裏邊其中一條法例咧，就係你喺海外，即使係做一啲批評或者係游說政府嘅工作咧，都可能係會觸犯呢個國安法嘅。咁冇幾耐之後咧，我哋就睇到一啲喺海外居住嘅香港人咧，或者前香港人咧，亦都係被話即係犯咗啲國安法，係被通緝嘅。咁而家咧就呢一位西人朋友啦，英國人咧就 Benedict 同埋佢嘅組織咧，亦都係受到威嚇同埋警告啦。咁究竟即係呢啲事情會唔會繼續蔓延咧？會唔會嚟到有一日就係話加拿大我哋嘅本地嘅組織，或者係本地嘅人士，或者甚至議員係亦都會收到啲警告，或者甚至被通緝咧？咁就呢個係要睇下日後點樣發展㗎啦。今日個話題講到呢度，下個禮拜呢一個話題會同大家繼續討論嘅。拜拜。